Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on last week's European Council and the proposals we are publishing today, which, on a reciprocal basis, seek to give reassurance and certainty to EU citizens who have made their homes and lives in our country. Mr. Speaker, this Council followed the formal start of the negotiations for the United Kingdom's departure from the EU, as well as marking the first anniversary of the referendum that led to that decision. In that referendum, the British people chose to take back control of our laws, our money and our borders, to restore supremacy to this Parliament and to reclaim our sense of national self-determination. And this government will fulfil the democratic will of the British people. But Mr. Speaker, the referendum was not a vote to turn our backs on our friends and neighbours. Indeed, as we become ever more internationalist in our outlook, and as we build the global Britain we want to see, we will continue to be reliable partners, willing allies and close friends with all the member states of the European Union. We want to work with one another to make sure we are all safer, more secure and more prosperous through our continued friendship. We want to buy each other's goods and services and trade as freely as possible. And we will continue to celebrate and defend the liberal democratic values that we share and to project those values that are the foundation of our freedoms and our way of life. In short, we want to build what I have described as a new, deep and special partnership between a confident, self-governing global Britain and all our friends and allies in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, that is the positive and constructive spirit in which my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, began the formal negotiations last week. And it is the same spirit in which the United Kingdom made a full contribution to all the issues at this Council, including on security, migration, climate change and trade. On security, I thanked our European partners for their condolences and for their resolve in standing with us following the appalling terrorist attacks that the UK has suffered in recent weeks. Those attacks have seen citizens from across Europe tragically killed and injured, but they have also seen our citizens standing together in some of the most inspiring ways. At London Bridge, we saw a Spanish banker tragically killed as he rushed to the aid of a woman being attacked. And we saw a Romanian baker fighting off the terrorists and giving shelter to Londoners in his bakery. These moments of heroism show how, far from dividing us, such attacks on our way of life will only ever serve to strengthen our shared unity and resolve. But, Mr. Speaker, these attacks also show that we need to respond to a new trend in the threat we face, as terrorism breeds terrorism, and perpetrators are inspired to attack by copying one another using the crudest of means. So, building on the bilateral agreement I reached with President Macron earlier this month, at this Council, I argued that we must come together to defeat the hateful and extremist ideologies that inspire these attacks, and to stop the internet being used as a safe space for extremists. When 1/3 of all links to Daesh propaganda are shared within the first hour of release, it is not enough for technology companies to respond reactively to extremist content on their platforms. So the Council agreed to put pressure on these companies to do more to remove this content automatically, and also to ensure that law enforcement agencies can access encrypted data. This was a significant step forward, and we will continue to work together with our European partners to combat this evil, to defend our values and to keep our citizens safe. Turning to other issues, on migration, the Council recommitted to the comprehensive approach that the UK has advocated, dealing with the drivers of migration while also doing more to stem the flow. And at this summit, I confirmed a new UK commitment of £75 million to meet urgent humanitarian needs in the central Mediterranean, while also facilitating voluntary returns of migrants making these treacherous journeys. On trade, as the UK leaves the European Union, we will be forging trade deals around the world with old friends and new allies alike. But this will not undermine the EU's trade agenda. It is not even in competition with it. So for as long as we remain part of the EU, we will continue to press for an ambitious trade agenda that can deliver jobs and growth across the continent. And that is what I did at this Council, where there was a particular focus on the work towards deals with Japan, Mexico and the Mercosur bloc of South American countries. And on climate change, the Council reaffirmed the commitment of all Member States to fully implement the Paris Agreement. The UK has already reaffirmed its own commitment, and I've expressed my disappointment to President Trump that he has taken a different decision. We will continue to make the case to our American allies to think again. Mr. Speaker, turning to citizens' rights, EU citizens make an invaluable contribution to our United Kingdom, to our economy, our public services and our everyday lives. They are an integral part of the economic, cultural and social fabric of our country, and I've always been clear that I want to protect their rights. That is why I initially sought an agreement on this before we triggered Article 50. And it is why I'm making it an immediate priority at the beginning of the negotiations. But, Mr. Speaker, that agreement must be reciprocal, because we must protect the rights of UK citizens living in EU member states too. At the Council, I set out some of the principles that I believe should underlie that reciprocal agreement, and there was a very positive response from individual leaders and a strong sense of mutual goodwill in trying to reach such an agreement as soon as possible. So today, we are publishing detailed proposals to do exactly that. And let me set out the key points for the House. First, we want certainty. I know there's been some anxiety about what would happen to EU citizens at the point we leave the European Union. Today, I want to put that anxiety to rest. I want to completely reassure people that under these plans, no EU citizen currently in the UK lawfully will be asked to leave at the point the UK leaves the EU. We want you to stay. Second, any EU citizen in the UK with 5 years continuous residence at a specified cut-off date will be granted settled status. They will be treated as if they were UK citizens for healthcare, education, benefits and pensions. While any EU citizens with less than 5 years residence who have arrived before the specified cut-off date will be able to stay until they have the 5 years residence to apply for UK settled status. Third, the specified cut-off date will be the subject of discussions, but it will be no earlier than the date we triggered Article 50 and no later than the date we leave the EU. Fourth, no families will be split up. Family dependents who join a qualifying EU citizen here before the UK's exit will be able to apply for settled status after 5 years. And after the UK has left the European Union, EU citizens with settled status will be able to bring family members from overseas on the same terms as British nationals. Fifth, there will be no cliff edge. There will be a grace period of up to 2 years to allow people to regularise their status. While those EU citizens who arrived in the UK after the specified cut-off date will be allowed to remain in the UK for at least a temporary period and may still become eligible to settle permanently. Sixth, the system of registration that citizens go through will be as streamlined and light touch as possible, and we intend to remove some of the technical requirements currently needed to obtain permanent residence under EU rules. For example, we will not require anyone to demonstrate that they have held comprehensive sickness insurance. Seventh, we expect this offer to be extended on a reciprocal basis to nationals of Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, and the reciprocal agreement on citizens' rights will apply to the entire United Kingdom and Gibraltar. Eighth, this is all without prejudice to the common travel area arrangements that exist between the UK and Ireland. We will preserve the freedoms that UK and Irish nationals currently enjoy in each other's state, and Irish citizens will not need to apply for permanent residence to protect these entitlements. And finally, the UK will continue to export and uprate the UK state pension and provide associated healthcare cover within the EU. We will continue to protect the export of other benefits and associated healthcare cover where the individual is in receipt of those benefits on the specified cut-off date. And subject to negotiations, we want to continue participating in the European Health Insurance Card Scheme so that UK cardholders could continue to benefit from free or reduced cost healthcare while on a temporary stay in the EU, and vice versa for EU cardholders visiting the UK. Mr. Speaker, this is a fair and serious offer. Our obligations our obligations in the withdrawal treaty with the EU will be binding on the UK as a matter of international law, and we will incorporate commitments into UK law, guaranteeing that we will stand firmly by our part of the deal. So our offer will give those 3 million EU citizens in the UK certainty about the future of their lives, and a reciprocal agreement will provide the same certainty for the more than 1 million UK citizens who are living in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, 1 year on from that momentous decision to leave the European Union, let us remember what we are seeking to achieve with these negotiations. We are withdrawing from a system of treaties and bureaucracy that does not work for us. But we are not withdrawing from the values and solidarity that we share with our European neighbours. As a confident, outward-looking and self-governing nation, we know that it is not just our past that is entwined in the fortunes of our friends and neighbours, it is our future too. That is why we want this new, deep and special partnership, and it's why we approach these negotiations with optimism. Because a good deal for Britain and a good deal for Europe are not competing alternatives. They are the best single path to a brighter future for all our children and grandchildren. That, I believe, is the future the British people voted for, and that is the future I want us to secure, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, could I join you in thanking all staff of the House of Commons for all the work they did over the weekend to ensure that our electronic systems are safe, and I'd be grateful if you could pass that on to staff. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of the statement that we've just heard. 68 days ago, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and asked this country to give her a strong mandate to negotiate Brexit. She offered little by way of strategy or plan, more hollow sound bites and grandstanding, and the past 6 months the Prime Minister stuck to her mantra, no deal is better than a bad deal, and continued with her threat to turn Britain into an offshore tax haven aimed at undercutting the European Union.
I know what you said though.
By ripping up regulation, hacking back public services and leading a race to the bottom in pay and conditions. Well, Mr. Speaker, the British people saw through that rhetoric, they saw through the threats, and instead of giving the Prime Minister the mandate she wanted, they rejected in large numbers the deregulated, low-wage future the Conservative Party has in mind for this country.
That's right.
She wanted a landslide and she lost her majority. Now her mandate is in tatters. But the Prime Minister still insists she's the best person to get a good deal for Britain. And incredibly believes she is the best person to strike a deal with the very people she spent the last 6 months threatening and hectoring.
Yeah.
The truth is this country needs a new approach to Brexit that a Tory government simply cannot deliver. They're taking Britain down a reckless path, prepared to put jobs and living standards at risk just to maintain support within her own party and keep her government in office. The cracks are already beginning to appear. While some in her party want to move towards Labour's approach to Brexit, at least in terms of protecting jobs, trade and the economy, the hard right voices in her cabinet and on her backbenches are still determined to force Britain over a cliff edge.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister needs to ignore them. She needs now to listen. So I ask her, has she promised to restore supremacy to this Parliament? Will she now be more transparent and involve it properly in the Brexit negotiation process? And will she now finally rule out the possibility of no deal being a viable option for this country? Choice is hers. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister went to Brussels last week to make what she described as a generous offer to EU nationals in this country. The truth is, it's too little, too late. That could have been done and should have been done a year ago when Labour put that very proposal to the House of Commons. But by making an offer only after negotiations have begun, the Prime Minister has dragged the issue of citizens and families deep into the complex and delicate negotiations of our future trade relations with the European Union, which she herself has been willing to say may result in failure. This isn't a generous offer. This is confirmation the government is prepared to use people as bargaining chips. So can the Prime Minister now confirm what will happen to her offer to nationals in this country if no deal is reached? What happens to the rights of family reunion which EU citizens are currently entitled to? Does the Prime Minister envisage the 5-year period EU nationals must accumulate here in Britain will also be the same for British citizens who want to retain the right to live in other parts of the European Union? And can the Prime Minister tell the House if these proposals were drawn up to take into account the impact on our public services, especially the National Health Service, where there is great concern over falling numbers of nurses and doctors already? Mr. Speaker, what makes this situation more remarkable is what we learned this weekend from the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, that immediately after last year's referendum, the government was willing to give assurances to EU nationals in this country. However, that was blocked in the Cabinet by the Prime Minister herself. This is people's lives we're talking about. Our neighbours, friends, husbands, wives, children. The Prime Minister clearly didn't care about them then. Why should they believe she cares about them now? Mr. Speaker, the country needs a change of direction. People are tired of tough talk from a weak government and a weak Prime Minister. The government needs to listen, put the national interest first and deliver a Brexit for the many, not the few, one that puts jobs, the economy and living standards first, by building a new partnership with the European Union on the basis of common interests and common values, one that protects living standards and promotes human rights through new trade deals throughout the world. That is what Labour would do. The Prime Minister has no mandate at home and no mandate abroad. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that it would only be a Labour government that works for the whole country that could deliver a Brexit that works for all and protects those jobs and living standards that are at risk while this government remains in office?
With your forbearance, if I can just make some short remarks on the sad passing of Gordon Wilson, who was Member of Parliament for Dundee East from 1974 to 1987. I'm sure everyone in the House would wish to pass their condolences to Gordon's family. Those of us in these benches were honoured to have the wisdom, wit and intelligence of Gordon with us for many, many decades. Indeed, he spoke with me on Wednesday before I entered the chamber to respond to the Queen's speech. He'll be sadly missed by all of us, in particular by those of us in these benches. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of the Government's plan for EU citizens. It was more than concerning to open the document designed to settle the lives of many of our EU citizens here to discover that it leaves many more questions than it does answers. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister went to Brussels last week and presented a plan for EU nationals. It fell short of expectations, with Dutch President Mark Rutte stating there are thousands of questions to ask about the proposal. Will the Prime Minister confirm that the Joint Ministerial Committee was consulted on the proposal she has published today? When will she honour the pledge of a United Kingdom approach to Brexit and give Scotland a place at the table in negotiations? Has the Prime Minister costed her plan for EU nationals, which she presented to the EU27 last week, and when will the costings be laid before the House? Will she confirm that EU citizens in Scotland will not have to fill out the 85-page paper form for residency? In the early hours after the EU referendum result, Scotland's First Minister called loud and clear for the Prime Minister to unilaterally guarantee EU citizens' rights. It is therefore shocking to learn in the Evening Standard that the then Prime Minister had pledged just to do that, but the current Prime Minister blocked the plan.
Shameful.
Does the Prime Minister accept she was wrong? And will she now do the right thing and honourable and reassure thousands of concerned EU nationals living in the UK today by unilaterally guaranteeing their rights? We created these circumstances. We should be showing leadership. We welcome the EU summit conclusions, especially those on jobs, growth and competitiveness. The SNP was the first government in the UK to publish a plan for Brexit. We put the single market at the heart of that, and we call again upon the Prime Minister to keep the UK in the single market to protect thousands of jobs in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Additional summit conclusions on the Paris Agreement are a very welcome step in ensuring the agreement is implemented following the US withdrawal last month. The Prime Minister must tell the House what the UK's next step will be in implementing the agreement in cooperation with our EU friends and neighbours. I welcome the announcement today of the uprating of pensions for those living in the EU, but will the Prime Minister extend that to pensioners living in other parts of the world that currently don't benefit from uprating? And finally, on behalf of these benches, I send best wishes to the Estonian President ahead of the European Estonian Presidency taking over on the 1st of July, and give thanks to the Maltese Presidency, which is coming to an end this week.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister keeps talking about the need for reciprocity. So can she tell the House why she chose not to simply reciprocate the genuinely fair and generous proposal of the EU Commission back in April that would have guaranteed the existing rights of the 1.2 million UK citizens living elsewhere in the EU? It would have saved a lot of time, it would have built up goodwill instead of ill will, and it would have got the negotiations off to a much better start.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I think I had pointed out there are some differences between the two proposals that have been put forward by us and the European Union through the European Commission. One of the key ones was the suggestion from the European Commission that after we've left the European Union there should be two classes of citizen here in the UK. UK citizens whose rights would be guaranteed by the UK courts and EU citizens whose rights would be guaranteed by the European Court of Justice. I don't believe that's right. I believe all citizens should have their rights guaranteed through our courts.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no reasonable person could oppose what she has proposed? The only people who do never wanted us to leave in the first place. And the idea that a foreign court should rule on the rights of people living here is akin to the outdated colonial approach taken towards China in the unequal treaties of the 19th century.
Well, I always bow to my honourable friend's historical knowledge and references that he makes. But I think the point is a clear one, which is that what we want to see when we leave the European Union is that citizens here in the UK have their rights guaranteed by UK courts and enforced by UK courts.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I note that the Prime Minister intends to do away with the technical requirement for comprehensive sickness insurance once a reciprocal arrangement has been reached. But constituents like my Lithuanian constituent, Dementa Macduff, are suffering as a result of this requirement at present, because despite being in Scotland for more than 5 years, she can't get permanent residency because she doesn't have comprehensive sickness insurance. And we heard evidence on this EU Select Committee in the last Parliament that no such insurance product actually exists. So will the Prime Minister do away with that requirement here and now, because it's a technical nonsense, because these people are using the NHS anyway?
I have to say to the Honourable Lady, that requirement for comprehensive sickness insurance is an EU requirement. As long as we are members of the EU, it will continue to be there. Once we leave, we can indeed remove it.
The Prime Minister's new governing partners, the Democratic Unionist Party, in their manifesto said they would seek to deliver, and I quote, a frictionless border with the Republic of Ireland and a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union. Is it not the case that neither of these objectives can be secured if we leave the European Union without a deal?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman that the requirement, the desire to bring about a frictionless border between Northern Ireland and Ireland and the desire to have that comprehensive free trade deal is exactly what the government is pursuing. It's what we've said in the Lancaster House deal, and we're doing it. I met the new incoming Taoiseach last week and discussed with him how we can work with the Irish government to ensure we deliver just that.
Mr Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Did the Prime Minister have a chance to discuss transitional funding arrangements for Wales at the European Council? Because surely she's going to have something to say to the people of Wales who now feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens in the United Kingdom when she can magic up billions for Northern Ireland and yet won't give a guarantee for Wales on future funding.
We've already been very clear on various aspects of funding from the European Union in relation to funding for farmers and the guarantees that we've given over a period of years for that. But we want to make sure that when we have money that comes back from the European, that we're no longer giving to the European Union, that we are able to spend that money in a way that is as effective as possible in driving improvements here across the whole of the United Kingdom.
The Prime Minister said earlier that no families will be split up, but she said during the general election campaign that she is intending to cut net migration to this country to the tens of thousands. Well, there's a problem here, because last year 136,787 people came to this country through the family route. So if she's going to meet her pledge, she is going to split families up, isn't she?
Let's be very clear about what I'm saying about EU citizens who qualify for settled status. They will be able to bring family members here into the United Kingdom without any extra requirements.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's offer is a step in the right direction, but it is long overdue. But she will know as a former Home Secretary that it is impossible to grant the rights she proposes to 3.2 million EU citizens and fulfil her target to reduce net migration to tens of thousands. So can she confirm for the House today that she has set aside this fanciful target and is going to propose instead to follow the Chancellor's advice of a Brexit that is rich in jobs?
We all want to ensure that the deal that we come to with the European Union is going to ensure we have the comprehensive free trade agreement that will indeed ensure that we see growth and prosperity and jobs here in the United Kingdom. That is the aim, but also we will be able to see jobs being brought here to the United Kingdom as a result of the trade arrangements we'll be making around the rest of the world.
He was there a moment ago. Mr David Hanson.
Could the Prime Minister assure the House that she's made progress on securing our membership of the European Arrest Warrant, Eurojust and Europol as part of her discussions? And in passing, could she also tell me that the UK government does know when European citizens enter the United Kingdom?
Well, as regards the Eurojust and Europol and the European Arrest Warrant, those will be matters for the negotiations. But I've been very clear that we want to retain our security cooperation, not just on counter-terrorism matters, but also on matters relating to crime.
Mr Speaker, with tens of thousands of Scottish jobs at risk, will the Prime Minister listen to our Chancellor's warnings and protect our place in the single market?
The Prime Minister said at the beginning of her statement that she wished for the UK and the EU to trade as freely as possible in both goods and services. So can she confirm to the House if any time was spent at all developing any proposals for the UK to remain both in the single market and the customs union?
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman that what we want to do is to ensure that we have that good, frictionless and as tariff-free as possible access to the single market. That's the way, that's what we're talking about when we talk about a comprehensive free trade agreement. That comprehensive free trade agreement will be part of the negotiations.
Speaker, the Prime Minister said, and I'm sure we'd all agree, that she wants to see the removal of serious and persistent criminals from the UK. Can she just say a little bit more about how she intends to do that, bearing in mind that she failed to do it in the 7 years or 6 years she was a Home Secretary?
I have to say to the honourable lady that her portrayal of what happened during the time that I was Home Secretary, and indeed since, is not correct. A significant number of persistent and serious criminals were removed from the United Kingdom. The basis on which it is possible to do that for people who are here as European Union citizens, of course, is subject to slightly different rules than for others, and once we're out of the European Union, we'll be able to adjust that.
Mr Speaker, I don't know if it's in order to blow a raspberry in this House, but that was the reaction of constituents, EU nationals, that I met at the Partick Language Hub in my constituency on Saturday when they heard about the reports of this deal. I just wonder how many EU nationals the Prime Minister has met or consulted with in drawing up the proposal she's presented today.
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, like other members of this House, I have met people in my constituency who are employers of EU nationals concerned about it, people who are EU nationals who are concerned about their position, and I suggest that what he actually does, because of course the detail had not been published at the weekend, that he actually takes the detail of this to his constituents and enables them to see for themselves the fair and serious offer that we're making.
Mr Speaker, sir, much play has been made this afternoon about the supremacy of this place in terms of the repatriation of powers from the European Union. Yet there's been no consideration made about how the whole governance and structure of the United Kingdom is to be developed post-Brexit. Will the government give any consideration to a concurrent constitutional convention that will consider how stable and sustainable governance and distribution of power and across the United Kingdom is considered after the Brexit process, including a federal UK? Thank you.
I apologise. I welcome the honourable gentleman to his place. I think there are one or two other honourable members who are new to the House who have stood up that I haven't welcomed, so I apologise to them for that. But can I just say to the honourable gentleman that I think the best way of ensuring good governance and stability across the United Kingdom is maintaining the United Kingdom.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has fielded, without really answering, a number of questions about the longer-term rights of EU nationals to bring the family over here should the need arise in the future. Can she now answer the question categorically? Will she give an absolute guarantee that the minimum income requirement that is obstructing so many family reunions for non-EU nationals, that requirement will never, under any circumstances, be imposed on any EU national in the United Kingdom?
EU nationals who have been here for 5 years, who have the 5 years residence, will qualify for settled status. EU nationals who have been here for less than 5 years will be given an opportunity to qualify for that settled status, i.e. to stay for those 5 years to qualify for that settled status. Those EU nationals will not have any extra requirements imposed on them in relation to bringing family members here into the United Kingdom. Once we have left the United Kingdom, then we will be establishing within the immigration rules the arrangements for EU nationals who then move into the United Kingdom, who will be in the same status as those who are moving from outside of the European Union.